Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, has just updated the Commons on the latest in the poisoning of ex-Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury. Here's a flavour of what she had to say.
We are committed to doing all we can to bring the perpetrators to justice, whoever they are and wherever they may be. The investigation is moving at pace, and this government will act without hesitation as the facts become clearer. As my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, made clear on Tuesday, we will respond in a robust and appropriate manner once we ascertain who was responsible.
That was the Home Secretary. Let's get the latest on the investigation with our Home Affairs correspondent Layla Nathu, who's in Salisbury. Layla, we now know that a nerve agent was used. How strong a lead is that in determining where the nerve agent came from and who used it?
Well, we are no closer to understanding those particular questions. All we know is the police have announced that it was a nerve agent, not what specific nerve agent it was. We understand that it is a rare kind of nerve agent. The use of nerve agents in itself, in such an incident, is itself not common. So there's clearly a narrow pool when it comes to where that substance could have come from. We understand that police do know the exact substance that was used in this incident, but they are not yet releasing that to us. In the meantime, they are trying to understand whether it was possibly ingested by Sergei and his daughter Yulia, whether this was some sort of airborne substance, when precisely they were exposed to it, because we know they had lunch at Zizi restaurant. That remains cordoned off at about 1:30 or so. Police were called at about 4:15. So there is this window in which they could have been exposed to this substance, and police are trying to piece together that timeline. How was this substance carried into Salisbury city centre, or indeed the country, and who, of course, brought it in?
Layla, the policeman who was first on the scene and was also taken ill is now able to talk. Tell us the state that he's in at the moment.
Well, his condition is described as serious but stable. He is now conscious. We understand that he was one of the first people to come to this scene. We don't know exactly what sort of contact he had with Sergei and Yulia Skripal, or indeed this substance, but the Home Secretary Amber Rudd said it was highly likely that he was exposed to this same substance. But he is now conscious, he is now talking. We're hoping to hear more about his condition later today. We do know, though, that Sergei and Yulia's condition is still described as critical but stable.
Thank you very much. Well, joining me here in the studio is the former Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind and former Asset Fund Manager Bill Browder, who calls himself Putin's #1 enemy as he tried to expose Putin's corruption. His lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was killed in a Russian prison by the Kremlin. Welcome to both of you. Before I come to you, Bill, Malcolm Rifkind, do you think the response so far from the British government has been correct in terms of its tone and approach?
Yes, because you can't reach conclusions until the basic investigation has been completed, till we are certain what was the nerve agent and whether it can be traced to a Russian origin.
But that hasn't stopped politicians on both sides saying that the government's response in general in its dealings with Russia has been weak in the past, particularly post the Litvinenko assassination.
I think governments always try to see if they can both respond but also maintain some opportunity for dialogue because of the wider issues that are always relevant, like counter-terrorism policy, policy on nuclear weapons and issues of that kind. But I have to add, if it is established in this case that it was clearly of Russian origin and that the Kremlin is the most likely explanation for this, then I think the consequences have to be very severe.
Well, what would they be? Cutting off all diplomatic ties?
Ultimately, you have to consider that, because if, following on the Litvinenko affair, if it is established, to our satisfaction, that Putin directly or indirectly was responsible for this, then in effect he is behaving like a rogue state. And it is, I think, becomes progressively more difficult to contemplate normal diplomatic relations with such a government.
Bill Browder, what has been your experience with Russia in terms of your business dealings?
Well, what I've learned about Putin, what I've learned about Russia is that it is a criminal enterprise. It's a criminal state. It's not a country as we know it. Vladimir Putin is one of the richest men in the world. He's worth $200 billion. He's gotten that money from extracting it through extortion and graft and theft from his country. He keeps that money all over the world, and his main objective is to stay in power and to keep his money safe in the West. And in this particular instance, the major theory I have about what would be his motivation for going after this man here is not so much the Mr. Skripal's personal situation, but more he has a whole range of secret policemen and intelligence officers who he has to keep motivated. And they're running out of money in Russia because of their economy. The oil prices are down, and they're now in a situation where if they can't motivate people with money, they have to motivate them with fear. And the best fear is to go after one person and his family and liquidate them in the most horrific way possible.
Do you think the British government's response should be tougher even at this stage, before we know categorically who's responsible?
Well, this is an act of terrorism, of state-sponsored terrorism. It's an act of terrorism using chemical weapons. And while we're all trying to prove things, there's enough circumstantial intelligence here that we should act on that, in the sense of have they rounded up Russian agents, other Russian agents in the UK to interrogate them under the terrorism laws? No.
Is that what you would be proposing at this stage, Malcolm Rifkin, that pressure should be put on the Russian state, or a signal that this is being taken very seriously even before we know what has happened?
We lose none of these options by allowing ourselves for the next few days to enable the police and the scientists to give us the hard information on the source of this attack, the methods that were used, and where the evidence points to a Russian connection. Nothing will be unavailable in a few days' time that is available today.
That's not exactly true. When you have a crime, all the evidence of the crime starts to disappear as time goes on. And if you act on it immediately, and it took them 4 days to take this thing seriously. In the first day, nobody even knew what was going on. In the second day, there was a fight.
Slightly less than 4 days, actually, because it happened on Sunday, didn't it? And already
we're
a couple of days.
We're on Thursday here. On Monday, there was a fight between the Wiltshire police and the Metropolitan Police. It was only until last night that this whole thing got serious.
May I say, I stand to no one in my respect and support for what Bill Browder has done in relation to Russia. He's a fantastic guy, but I have to differ from him on this particular matter. In any criminal investigation, however serious, from 9/11 onwards, I mean, the Americans didn't, within 24 hours, start taking action against the Taliban and invading Afghanistan. They waited till a few days became abundantly clear the responsibility, and there is no evidence being lost simply because we do not punish Russia today on the basis of what we suspect. But at this stage, we have not got as much hard proof as we're likely to have.
Do you think the
next few days.
Do you think the evidence is pointing that way, though? That the finger of suspicion is pointing at Russia and the Russian state? I mean, Edward Lee, the Tory MP, has said it's a brazen act of war, and peace through strength is the only way we can deal with Russia.
These are fine words, but they don't add up. You say what seems the most likely explanation. Here is a former Russian intelligence officer who spied for the United Kingdom. He's living in Britain. He's now likely, or may lose his life as a result of this attack. Where else is the responsibility to lie? Now, it could be Putin. It, in theory, could be rogue elements in the Russian intelligence services operating with the Russian criminal elements in London. Putin himself might be behind that. We just do not know. Hopefully, we will know a lot more as this investigation proceeds.
Right, but will we know a lot more? I mean, it will be very difficult, won't it, to trace exactly whether or not Putin was behind it.
You don't need 100% evidence. What you do need is the phrase we would normally use in our own courts, beyond reasonable doubt. And if we are satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Putin either directly or indirectly is responsible, that is when the United Kingdom has to contemplate as much punishment as it can impose. Now, we're not a superpower. There's limits to what we can achieve. But I bring up again the question, diplomatic relations are what you have with countries where you can have a meaningful dialogue.
Right.
And if we cannot have that with Russia for the time being, then for the time being, we have to seriously consider whether their embassy should just be locked up, closed down, and they can depart for a period of time.
People might say, well, that's not very much, is it?
It's a hell of a lot.
I mean, what else could be done in terms of financial sanctions? Because there are sanctions at the moment. What else could be done to put pressure on the state?
It's real clear. We have huge leverage in this one situation because all Russians, Russian government officials, Russian government-connected oligarchs have huge properties here in London. And we have laws in place, laws named after my murdered lawyer Sergei Magnitsky, called the Magnitsky Act, in which we can seize those assets. And we should seize those assets, and I'm telling you that seizing those assets would have a dramatic effect, because after Litvinenko, effectively we did nothing. We kicked out a few diplomats, they kicked out a few diplomats, and then we all came back together. That's not going to prevent them from doing this type of thing. But what will is if their assets get seized.
Well, we already have new laws now that if people have a level of wealth in this country that they cannot explain having obtained legitimately, then we can expropriate their assets. And I agree with Bill.
Well, has anyone been? Has anyone had their assets?
The courts have just been in the process of giving the first authorizations
to
now. What I'm saying,
Russian oligarchs.
Well, I don't know the detail.
There was no Russian oligarchs yet.
What I'm saying is, I agree with Bill. Not just a question of whether they happen to be oligarchs. If they are, we operate a rule of law system, and if there is evidence to justify individuals, whether they are Russian oligarchs or from Ukraine or from other countries, who are acting illegally or supporting illegal action, yes, what Bill says should happen.
But have we made it too comfortable? Have we made it too easy for people like that to come to London? And they obviously feel this is a great place to come to educate their children, and there has been no real pressure.
You raise a very, very important point, because this isn't just about Russians or Ukrainians. I remember even when I was Foreign Secretary in the 1990s, many countries said, you have got some of our dissidents living in London, why do you allow this? And the reality is we've always had a tolerant system that if people obey the law in this country, we don't hold against them their political background. Now, that may be becoming more difficult to sustain.
Right. What does it say? If it is shown that Vladimir Putin, the Russian state, had some involvement in this and is prepared to do what has happened to Sergei Skripal and his daughter, does that show that he is becoming, Vladimir Putin, even bolder, even more brazen than in the past?
He has been completely brazen. Let's just look at some of the things that have happened. They shot down MH17. 298 innocent people died. They cheated in the Olympics. They tried to cheat the U.S. elections. They killed Litvinenko with nuclear poison in this country. Putin has been way over the line for a long time. We just continue in the most subservient way to accept it and not do anything about it. And we have leverage to do something, which is they do their crimes in Russia and they keep their property in the West. And they care about that property in the West.
Do you think it was a weak response following Litvinenko?
Well, I think... No, I don't actually. I mean, I think that all the steps that were taken, I know from my own recollection, that it led to a very, very deep rupture with Russia. Now, I hear what Bill says, and I wish I could believe that simply confiscating a few buildings and a few assets in London will change Russian foreign policy. Bill seems to think it will do. He may be right. I can't say he's wrong. Certainly he's wrong, but I just doubt it, frankly. It doesn't sound that Putin will be quaking in the Kremlin because a few buildings in London are expropriated. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be, but let's not assume that somehow that is the magic elixir.
It won't necessarily change anything.
Well, we know that he cares about money more than he cares about human life, and we also know, in the case of these asset sanctions, these asset freezing sanctions, he cares about it very profoundly because the law that I was responsible for getting passed in America, the Magnitsky Act, he sent his own emissary to Trump Tower to try to get the Magnitsky Act repealed as his one ask of Donald Trump before Donald Trump was elected.
Right.
And so I wouldn't underestimate the power of going after his property. And certainly all these diplomatic tools, these tools of cutting off relations, they don't work. The kicking out ambassadors or whatever, that doesn't work. What does work, though, is going after their personal financial interests.
How scared are you?
Well, I live in a state where they've been after me. They've threatened me with death, with kidnapping, with arrest, with extradition. I'm probably their #1 target among foreigners.
Right. So not in a very good position, personally. I mean, Malcolm Rifkind, when you say we could lock the door, close the embassies, beyond that, what would the robust response look like?
It could be a combination of what Bill is saying, plus the diplomatic action, plus other remedies that are available. But let's not kid ourselves. A country the size of Russia and as powerful as Russia, there is no either single act or combination of acts that can quite literally force them to change their policy. That's not the real world any more than you could do that with the United States or with China or other countries of that size and of that power. So what we have to do is to be rational. We have to use such levers as we have, including the ones that Bill mentions. But at the end of the day, if Putin judges that his own priorities still make sense to behave in such a disgraceful way, well, it's bad news for the world as a whole.
Right.
But Britain by itself cannot make a fundamental change in Russia. It would require a concerted international response, including the United States, including many other countries, all being prepared to act jointly.
Right, but in the meantime, you're in fear for your life, are you?
I don't live in fear, but they're after me for sure.
OK, what would you suggest, looking at this from the outside, that is really going to do anything to exert pressure on the Russian state?
Well, I think we've got to establish the facts first, and then if there is a link, the question is what you do. I think the room for manoeuvre is actually quite limited for the UK government acting unilaterally. I think there is something about property, because actually Russian money coming into our property market has been massively distorting. So it not only will benefit us in terms of foreign policy, but I think actually will benefit the property market domestically. But I think the big thing is, will it have any impact? And I fear it won't, because in the end, only multilateral action across the EU, ironically, would put us in a position where we could actually bite, and so the Russian government might change its behaviour. But I worry that Britain just acting on its own, even if it is a combination and package of things, in the end won't fundamentally change the behaviour of the Russian state.
Thank you both very much. I have to finish it there.
Hello again from Salisbury, where police are still searching this city for clues that may help them understand who was responsible for the poisoning of former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. The investigators have been piecing together their last movements before they were found just outside the Maltings shopping centre here. Sky's Dermot Murnaghan has been walking the route police believe they took.
Well, the mystery starts here right in the centre of Salisbury. I suppose like many millions of Britons last Sunday, after the awful weather we had the week before, Yulia and Sergei Skripal were enjoying a Sunday walk. So they walked the mile and a half, we think, from their home on the outskirts of Salisbury to there. Zizi's restaurant, Italian restaurant on Castle Street adjoining Marketplace. They apparently sat at the back of the restaurant, table 37, we're told, where they ordered starters, seafood risotto, white wine and water. Now, Mr. Skripal apparently got a bit angry about the amount of time he had to wait for his food. It was about 40 minutes, according to a chef. He got angry, he started banging the table. He demanded the bill while Yulia remained fairly calm. And the chef says if there was any tampering, any attempted tampering with what they ate and drank, it couldn't have been the food that was served from the kitchen at the back of the restaurant, but he says the bar is towards the front. Whatever happened, they left with Mr. Skripal in a fairly bad mood, and they then made their way up the short distance, up Marketplace, through, presumably down Market Walk, heading towards the Mill pub. Well, after eating at Zizi's restaurant, the Skripals presumably walked their way down by the River Avon. It's about 400 yards or so to here, to the Mill pub, named for obvious reasons, right by the River Avon. They went inside, we suspect, for about an hour. They arrived here around about 2:45, and they were then found on a bench just back up that way about an hour later. What they had inside we know less about, but the questions now being asked, and you can see the police still outside, the pub is still shut. The police will be examining any CCTV from inside to see if this was the place where any tampering took place, if that happened. Well, a strange sequence of events that Sunday reached their conclusion here, just a couple of hundred yards back up the pedestrianised walkway by the River Avon from the pub where the Skripals had had their drink. They were found slumped on that bench there by this park, and descriptions from eyewitnesses who originally saw them say that Sergei Skripal was vomiting violently and that Yulia was limp and staring blankly into space. Now, also of significance in this investigation is just there back down that market walk, that covered walkway. Now, this is the route that the Skripals will have made their way from the restaurant to the pub. It's all very close together. There's a CCTV camera just outside that gym there, and that recorded a couple, an older man and a younger woman, walking past about 5 or 10 minutes before the Skripals were found on that bench. So what had started as a typical, a normal Sunday in a sleepy market city had ended catapulting Salisbury into the centre of speculation about a world of international espionage.
So Dermot Murnhan there walking us through what is believed to be the final route that the couple took here in the centre of Salisbury on Sunday. We're just outside the Malting shopping centre here. Behind me is that restaurant that Dermot mentioned, and as you can see, it is still very much a live crime scene. There is growing speculation here about what kind of nerve agent was used in the attack, and I'm joined now by Andrea Seller, who is Professor of Inorganic Chemistry at University College London. Thanks very much for being with us on Sky News. What are your thoughts about this nerve agent? What type of nerve agent do you think could be behind this?
I mean, this is a really pretty extraordinary attack. You know, the idea that someone might be able to introduce a nerve agent, you know, so deliberately that targets two people is pretty astonishing. And nerve agents... You
want me to break into this, or...?
They're not just regular sort of poisons.
Well, I'm very sorry, we're going to have to cut that interview short. I want to take you straight to the House of Commons, where the Home Secretary is speaking.
I regret to inform the House that a police officer has also fallen seriously ill. The officer was one of the first responders on Sunday, acting selflessly to help others. The latest update from the hospital is that the officer remains serious but stable and is conscious, talking and engaging. Officers from Wiltshire Police are providing support to the officer's family and colleagues. Our thoughts are with all three victims, their families and friends, at what for them will be an incredibly difficult time. Wiltshire Police began an investigation on Sunday to determine how the individuals fell ill and whether a crime had been committed. They declared a major incident on Monday. On Tuesday, the Metropolitan Police decided that, given the unusual circumstances, responsibility for the investigation should transfer to the Counter-Terrorism Police Network. Samples from the victims have been tested by experts at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, who are world-renowned experts in this field. As Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley announced yesterday, that forensic analysis has revealed the presence of a nerve agent, and the incident is therefore being treated as attempted murder. I can confirm that it is highly likely the police officer has been exposed to the same nerve agent. Mr. Speaker, I spoke only this morning with Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley, and he confirmed that we remain in the midst of a fast-paced criminal investigation. As such, I will not comment further on the nature of the nerve agent. We must give the police the space they need to conduct a thorough investigation. All members will recognise that an investigation such as this will be complex and may take some time. Public safety continues to be the #1 priority for this government. Professor Sally Davis, the Chief Medical Officer, stated yesterday that based on the evidence we have, there is a low risk to the public. The UK has a world-leading emergency response. It is regularly tested and exercised to ensure we can deliver an effective response to a wide range of chemical, biological and radiological incidents. The three emergency services are well supplied with state-of-the-art equipment to respond to such threats. The frontline response is supported by world-class scientific research and advice. This ensures that decision-making on the ground by all agencies involved is firmly based on the available evidence. This will also support the decontamination activity needed to return the location to normality. The police are working closely with Public Health England, DEFRA and DSTL. They have cordoned all known sites in Salisbury that were visited by the two initial victims before they became unwell, and are taking the necessary measures to protect public safety. Mr. Speaker, I want to now turn to the speculation, of which there has been much, around who is responsible for this most outrageous crime. The use of a nerve agent on UK soil is a brazen and reckless act. This was attempted murder in the most cruel and public way. People are right to want to know who to hold to account. But if we are to be rigorous in this investigation, we must avoid speculation and allow the police to carry on their investigation. As the Assistant Commissioner said yesterday, the investigation now involves hundreds of officers following every possible lead to find those responsible. Some of those leads have come from members of the public. I'd like to thank the people of Salisbury for their help and for the calm they have shown over the last 4 days. I encourage anyone who visited Salisbury Town Centre and surrounding areas on Sunday afternoon and has not yet spoken to the police to get in touch. We are committed to doing all we can to bring the perpetrators to justice, whoever they are and wherever they may be. The investigation is moving at pace, and this government will act without hesitation as the facts become clearer. As my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, made clear on Tuesday, we will respond in a robust and appropriate manner once we ascertain who was responsible. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close where I began by expressing my sincere thanks to the emergency services and hospital staff for their tireless efforts over the last 4 hours. They have acted with utter professionalism to both minimise the risk to the wider public and care for the victims of the attack, for which I know we are all very grateful. Our thoughts will be with the victims and their families over the coming days. Finally, I thank members for their understanding that there will clearly be limits on what we can say as this investigation continues. As and when information can be made public, it will be. Mr. Speaker, I commend the statement to the House.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement? Mr. Speaker, can I start by paying tribute to the courage and dedication of the emergency services who responded to this horrendous incident. In particular, can I say that the thoughts of the whole House will be with the officer who has been hospitalized following this attack. Can I also pay tribute to the people of Salisbury? Can she confirm that the great cathedral city of Salisbury remains open for business? Mr. Speaker, the apparent poisoning of Yulia and Sergei Skripal, as well as the police officer who suffered serious injury, must of course be fully and completely investigated. I wholeheartedly concur with the Secretary of State that the investigation should be allowed to take place free from speculation, conjecture, or interference. At best, these can only be distraction. At worst, they can hamper the investigatory efforts. Members and right honourable members should be equally cautious and guarded in their comments they make. Idle or ill-informed speculation is not helpful. Can the Home Secretary reassure the House that all necessary resources are being made available to the investigation? Clearly, it is vitally important that there is no speculation about the conclusions of the investigation and that it is allowed to take its course. But can I ask the Home Secretary to ensure that she continues to keep the House updated? Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, asked the Foreign Secretary on Tuesday about the sanctions bill. Is the Home Secretary satisfied that the government has all necessary sanctions available to it? There are a number of proposals currently being debated in the committee. Can I ask the Home Secretary to look again at them to ensure that we have the necessary tools going forward? The case raises broader and extremely important issues. These include how we prioritise the fight against crime and terrorist crime, that take place in this country. There is, after all, no greater priority for the state than to secure the safety of all those who are resident here. Today is not the day for discussion of or divisions over those priorities in the fight against crime and terrorism, nor a discussion on budgets and how they are allocated. We will return to those at another opportunity. For now, let us be clear. We on this side of the House are appalled at the idea that anyone might be poisoned on the streets of our towns and our cities. We offer our full support to those seeking to investigate the matter. We commend the action of the emergency services, their professionalism, dedication, and bravery. And we share with the government a determination that this case be brought to a speedy and just conclusion, and that similar incidents are prevented in the future. Thank you.
The Home Secretary.
Well, I thank the member for Manchester Gorton for his carefully thought and considerate comments, and I'm delighted to hear such unity of purpose across the House on this matter. He referred to the great cathedral city of Salisbury, and I share his view on the city of Salisbury, and indeed the people of Salisbury, who have reacted so well to this. And I thank also the Member of Parliament for Salisbury, who is with me here on the front bench, for his consideration and support over the past 4 days. Yes, I can reassure the honourable gentleman and the House, the police and the emergency services have the necessary resources. That is always one of my first questions, and they are reassuring in that matter. On his point about keeping the House updated, of course I will, and I thank him for his consideration and understanding that there may be limits to that, but where I can, I will of course take the opportunity to come here to discuss it with the House, partly because of the very severity of this situation. I recognise the need to do so wherever possible. Members are rightly keen to find out what's happening. And he referred also to the sanctions bill. We are, of course, engaging with the people, the members of Parliament, who are proposing additional amendments. There have already been amendments that reflect the sort of initiatives he is asking for in the recent Criminal Finances Act. There are additional proposals in the sanctions bill, and we will be considering them carefully.
Sir Edward Lee.
So that's the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, addressing the House, bringing us up to date on the investigation. She said that the officer involved is in a serious and stable condition. His family have been given support, and she confirmed that it was highly likely that he had been exposed to the same nerve agent as Sergei and Yulia Skripal. She said it's a fast-paced investigation, a complex investigation, and she also added that it was a brazen and reckless act. And she thanked the people of Salisbury for their calmness over the last few days, and also their help in trying to determine what was behind this attack. Well, we can return now to Andrea Sala, who is Professor of Inorganic Chemistry at University College London. My apologies for cutting you short a little earlier when we had to cut to Amber Rudd. You were halfway through explaining to us what type of nerve agent you think could have been behind this.
Well, as I was saying earlier, I mean, this is really extraordinary because nerve agents have a long history. They've been around since the 1930s. But one of the things is that we have consistently legislated against these by international treaties. And these are compounds which are so poisonous. And in fact, the only places that they're really likely to come from are state laboratories. I mean, you need a level of kind of technical sophistication which is really high to be able to do this. Now, it's interesting that when Amber Rudd speaks of this attack, she talks about it being brazen. There's no question. But I don't think this was in any way reckless. This is highly targeted, and it really shows a kind of level of impunity in wanting to deliver a ferocious message to particular individuals, saying we can get you anywhere you want at any time. So this is really interesting, and the choice of a nerve agent, I think it kind of narrows it down to really state actors.
So you're in little doubt then that there was state involvement here?
I mean, I really find it hard to believe that this could have been done by some kind of small-time outfit. One also has to ask questions about, why would one do it? And I think there are real questions about, why this person, we know that he had a background in espionage and so on, and so, what is it about him? What did he know? What risk did he pose? And so, this is really interesting. Now, what, in fact, they will be trying to do now is really to look at what is left over, the kinds of residues that are present on, presumably, the skin and the clothing of the victims, because that's really where the kind of traces are left behind. Remember that, when we say that chemicals decompose or degrade, it's not that they magically disappear. What happens is that they undergo chemical reactions in kind of predictable ways. And so you can go looking at the residues, and that might allow you to work back. To me, in a way, they will have eliminated the most obvious candidates, the ones whose names have been in the media over and over. And, it is possible that this is something new. Again, if it's something new, this is further evidence that this is a sophisticated attack coming from people who have primary knowledge of this kind of very dangerous science.
Andrea Sella, we appreciate your expertise from University College London. Many thanks indeed. Well, it is approaching lunchtime here in Salisbury. The sun is out. People are going about their daily business. But, of course, they have so many questions here, as indeed we all do, about who was behind this attack and how an attack like this, on this scale, was able to be carried out in what is normally a fairly sleepy cathedral city, a city where they pride themselves on not being in the news very often. Well, they are at the centre of the news today, as some of those questions remain unanswered. Jane, for now, back to you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Now let's take you across to Dermot, who is in Salisbury.
Indeed, Jane, thank you very much indeed. Hello again from this cathedral city, where there's still a heavy police presence right here in the city centre, with a number of buildings still cordoned off following the poisoning of the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Now, the attack has been described by the Home Secretary Amber Rudd as a brazen and reckless act of attempted murder. Counter-terrorism officers say they know what nerve agent was used, but will not reveal publicly at this time what precisely it was. Well, join me now from Wiltshire is chemical weapons expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Good to talk to you, Hamish. Perhaps you could shed some light. Could you narrow it down to what precisely this nerve agent was?
Well, what we know at the moment, it wasn't sarin, which we've seen frequently used in Syria, or the deadly VX, which was used to murder Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia last year. The other potential options are a nerve agent called Soman or a nerve agent called Tabun, developed about the same time, the beginning of the Second World War, the end of the 1930s. It's also been suggested that perhaps it might be an exotic or boutique type chemical weapon made specially for this particular attack. And we'll find out, no doubt, when the government and when Porton Down feel that it is the case. The key thing is that they know what it is, they can treat the 3 injured people appropriately, and with Porton Down on the doorstep and Health Protection England, they actually couldn't be in a better place to be treated for this chemical attack.
Do they actually have antidotes to it? And I guess the more quickly they are administered, the better the outcomes potentially are. Now, there seems to have been quite a gap between that happening for the Skripals. Hamish, I believe there's a communications problem between us. Can I try one more time? Asking you about antidotes and the speed of them being administered and how that would affect the medical outcome. Well, I tell you what, that's a terrible pity. It seems that we've lost communications with Hamish de Bretton-Gordon and his chemicals and biological expertise. We'll try and go back to him in a little bit. Well, I'm glad to say we have re-established contact with the chemical weapons expert, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Good to talk to you again, Hamish. Tell me this, your thoughts on what the Home Secretary Amber Rudd said about how reckless it was to use something like this in the centre of a market city.
Well, chemical weapons are dreadful weapons. We've seen more use of chemical weapons this year than we have since the First World War. And they are deadly. They're very, very toxic. And as we've seen, we've got 3 people seriously ill. It's surprising, and it's a delight that they haven't died, because usually nerve agents work very quickly. In Ghouta, back in 2013 in Syria, 1,500 people died in the matter of an hour. And in Halabja in 1988, 30 years ago next week, 17,000 people died within a day from the use of chemical weapons. So, using them on the streets of the UK is absolutely abhorrent. And the secondary contamination we've seen for the policemen could well have been much wider. I think the emergency services acted extremely well and quickly to reduce this potential disaster to what is 3 seriously ill people. It could be a lot worse.
So tell me this, I mean, on the basis of the knowledge we have about them all surviving, and we don't know when it was administered in terms of the gap to them being found, does that mean that it wasn't very strong, or that they were treated very quickly, they got some kind of antidote to them, or a combination of all of that?
Dermot, I think it's a combination of all of them. I think the nerve agent is probably not as toxic as, say, sarin or VX that we've seen used. It might be one of the older nerve agents, perhaps Tabin or Soman, or potentially a boutique one that has been put together to try and mask its origins, because Porton Down will be doing chemical attribution now to work out exactly where this stuff came from. I think the way that it was ingested into the body, probably through the skin, again, reduced its toxicity. And people did react quickly. There are very effective antidotes for nerve agents, something called atropine, which as a soldier I took on the battlefields of the world for over 23 years, and our own military today will have it. And if you inject that soon after a nerve agent attack, your chances of survival are very good. So it's a combination of things, probably a weak nerve agent than one that the military would use in a mass scale, and also the very quick reaction of the police and the emergency services when this happened a few days ago.
OK, Hamish, must end it there. Always very good to talk to you. I'm so glad we were able to re-establish contact.
The police officer who rushed to the aid of a former Russian spy and his daughter after they'd been poisoned by nerve gas is still in a serious condition in hospital. But Wiltshire police say Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who's 38, is now able to sit up and talk. Investigations are continuing in Salisbury into how and why Sergei Skripal and his 33-year-old daughter were exposed to nerve gas on Sunday afternoon. A doctor who was first on the scene has told the BBC that Yulia Skripal had stopped breathing and was in a terrible state. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons has sent this report from Salisbury.
Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey is 38 years old, a decorated officer with plenty of experience on the front line of policing. He's still in a serious condition, but the good news today is that he is awake and talking.
He's a great character. He's a huge presence in Wiltshire Police, well liked, well loved, massively dedicated officer. He's clearly receiving high specialist treatment. So he's well, he's sat up. He's not the Nick that I know, but of course he's receiving a high level of treatment.
The inquiry's not letting up. Police began what appeared to be a major search and possible decontamination of Sergei Skripal's house today. For a while, they even taped off the graves of his wife and son.
We are committed to doing all we can to bring the perpetrators to justice, whoever they are and wherever they may be. The investigation is moving at pace, and this government will act without hesitation as the facts become clearer.
The BBC's been told the nerve agent used was not sarin or VX, which have been used as weapons in the past, but rarer. Decontamination teams were heavily protected on Sunday. But look at this picture from earlier that day. No respirators or suits. These officers could not have known they were about to deal with the use of a chemical weapon in their city.
I guess it really brings home to us and the public again that we run towards danger while others walk away, and sometimes we run to something we don't know.
The risk they faced became obvious today when a bench on which the Skripals were sitting was exposed by gusts of wind. Just look at the operation needed to go in and peg it down again, 4 days on from the incident. And it wasn't just police officers who risked being exposed that afternoon. I've spoken to a doctor who was there. She's asked us not to name her, but she says she came across Yulia Skripal slumped over the bench, unconscious, not breathing, vomiting and having a fit. She stepped in. She got Yulia onto the floor. She got her breathing and she handed her patient over to paramedics. She is concerned about what she's come into contact with, but she feels fine. Sergei and Yulia Skripal, attacked as she came to Britain from Russia to visit him, are not getting better. They remain in a critical condition as the race to find their assailant or assailants continues. Tom Simons, BBC News, Salisbury.
Well, suggestions that Moscow may have been involved in the attack have sparked anger in Russia. The state media has complained of an anti-Russian campaign by the West, and there's little sympathy amongst Russian people for the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal, as our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports.
Moscow feels a world away from the drama of Salisbury. Relaxed Russians are out enjoying a public holiday, determined not to allow a spy scandal to spoil their day. People here are short on sympathy for Sergei Skripal.
The fewer secrets you sell, the longer you'll live.
Don't betray your motherland, then you'll have no problems.
When he was in prison in Russia, he was healthy. He goes to Britain and gets poisoned. He should have stayed here.
It's a similar message from Russian TV. The Kremlin-controlled media have been mocking Boris Johnson and making fun of Britain. If you're a professional traitor, he says, my advice, don't move to England. Something's not right there. The climate, perhaps. But too many bad things go on there. People are hanged, poisoned, helicopter crashes, or they fall out of windows.
Under Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin has sent a very clear message to the Russian people that their country is a besieged fortress, threatened by enemies abroad and traitors at home. That's why there's little sympathy here for Sergei Skripal.
And if Moscow did target Sergei Skripal,
most Russian people, not me of course, but most Russian people will take pride in it. Because there's a very black and white worldview. It's us against them. Putin has brought this back in a big way.
Today, the president delivered a special address. No mention of spies. He congratulated Russian women on International Women's Day. Moscow knows it's under suspicion, but the Kremlin is acting as if it's business as usual. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, we can join our security correspondent Gordon Carrera from outside MI6 headquarters now. And are we any closer to finding out how and why the Skripals were poisoned?
Well, the identity of that nerve agent, described as very rare, is still crucial to the investigation because it may well point to which country, even which laboratory was involved in its manufacture. Government officials are still being careful about pointing the finger at Russia until the facts are clearer. In terms of why, though, well, there has been speculation that perhaps after he came here, Sergei Skripal was still somehow involved in active intelligence work. I've picked up no signs of that from people I've been speaking to. There was even speculation he might have been involved in that famous dossier on Donald Trump, drawn up by a former ex-MI6 officer, Chris Steele. But sources close to Chris Steele's company, Orbis, have told the BBC that they had no links whatsoever with Sergei Skripal. So that still leaves the most plausible motive as revenge. Revenge for his working for British intelligence. MI6 behind me. There will have been a lot of meetings at MI6 in the last few days, a lot of concern as well about the potential perception that it can't protect the lives of its agents even when they're in the UK.
Pereira, thank you.
The Home Secretary Amber Rudd has said that the alleged attempted murder of Sergei Skripal and his daughter was a brazen and reckless attack, but she stopped short of blaming Russia, and Russia has denied involvement. The pair are still critically ill, but the police officer who went to their aid is now able to speak from his intensive care bed. A total of 21 people have been treated since the incident. At the same time, details have begun to emerge of Sergei Skripal's dealings with the British security services. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has the latest.
Their house cordoned off, a crime scene undergoing intense forensic examination, as Sergei Skripal, his daughter Yulia, lie unconscious in hospital, critically ill but stable. Across town in Salisbury from the family home, the graves of Sergei Skripal's wife Lyudmila and son Alexander, who died just last year in St. Petersburg of liver failure. The police know what type of nerve agent was used, but have not released that information yet.
Secretary Amber Rudd.
Leaving the Home Secretary Amber Rudd this morning with little more to tell Parliament beyond a medical update.
Both remain unconscious and in a critical but stable condition. I regret to inform the House that a police officer has also fallen seriously ill. The officer was one of the first responders on Sunday, acting selflessly to help others. The latest update from the hospital is that the officer remains serious but stable and is conscious, talking and engaging.
The officer was named this afternoon as Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey.
He's well, he's sat up. He's not the Nick that I know, but of course he's receiving a high level of treatment.
This photo was taken roughly an hour after the couple were discovered on the bench and moments after Yulia Skripal was taken to hospital by helicopter.
As and when...
A brazen and reckless attack, she called it, but for now the government is hedging, saying it's too early to apportion blame, so let's give the police the time they need. Enjoying happier times, Sergei and Yulia Skripal at one of several sites in Salisbury now under police investigation as the possible site of the nerve agent attack on Sunday. But tonight we can reveal what may be a possible motive for pro-Putin factions to have Sergei Skripal murdered. A possible link between Skripal's activities as a spy for the British and the alleged Kremlin plot to sabotage the recent US election. We know Skripal got 13 years in Russia for betraying his country back in 2006. But he was recruited by an Oxford-educated British Army officer. We won't reveal his name for security reasons. His career in the Foreign Office and as an MI6 officer took him across the world from Eastern Europe to South America. According to his own CV, some years after running Skripal as a spy, he worked for Orbis Business Intelligence. Now that company is run by fellow former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, the man who compiled the controversial dossier alleging a Russian plot to sabotage the US election. We also know that, as Skripal went about his daily shopping routines in Salisbury, leading an apparently quiet life, the MI6 agent who recruited him lived in the area. And we know he told Valery Morozov, a fellow Russian exile here, that he still worked in cybersecurity. So was he, in fact, still connected to his MI6 handler and the company now pointing the finger at the Kremlin for US election sabotage? If so, that would be more than a motive for the Kremlin to act. After all, this is Vladimir Putin, just 2 days after Skripal was poisoned. Watch carefully. And getting in on the act, state-controlled Russian TV reminding viewers just last night that betraying the motherland can be fatal wherever you are. Being a traitor, he says, is one of the most dangerous professions in the world. Russia's embassy in London choosing to remind people here, hang on, he's one of yours. Today in Salisbury, the wind blew the police tent free, revealing for a moment the park bench, the crime scene of what the police say was a targeted, attempted murder.
Alex Thompson reporting. So what do we now know about the nerve agents that could have been used in this attack, and why are they so deadly? Here's our science editor, Tom Clark.
When people dress like this to respond to a poisoning, you can safely assume the poison is suspected of being particularly dangerous. Police have now confirmed Colonel Skripal and his daughter were attacked with a nerve agent, that phrase typically reserved for state-manufactured chemical weapons. They work by disrupting communication between nerves and muscles, causing catastrophic effects on the body, with respiratory failure usually being the fatal one. The fact the intended targets are still alive may be entirely thanks to emergency services.
If you can give the supportive care, you can keep the respiration going, if you can keep the heart rate going, if you can stop any seizure activity, then that's the key thing here.
First invented in the 1930s, the history of nerve agent use is mercifully sparse, but still horrific. Saddam Hussein is thought to have used sarin and VX to kill thousands in the village of Halabja in 1988. Sarin's most recent outing, despite its total ban under the Chemical Weapons Convention, was by the Syrian government against its own people in Idlib. The more toxic VX agent was used to assassinate Kim Jong-nam as he walked through Kuala Lumpur airport last year. He was the half-brother of North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. As a general rule, the more sophisticated a nerve agent, the more likely it originated from a state-level source or from persons with access to one.
It's possible under the terms of the Chemical Weapons Convention to have a single small-scale facility in the country where minute quantities of nerve agents may be synthesized for research. It's probably synthesized for the purpose of individual assassination.
It's now been reported the agent in this attempted double murder was neither sarin or VX specifically, but there are several other deadly compounds in the same chemical family, developed on both sides during the Cold War, some designed as binary agents where two precursors combine to make the deadly poison. Britain has the dubious distinction of having invented VX, developed as a weapon just 7 miles from Salisbury at Porton Down in the 1950s. Its scientists will now be using forensic chemical techniques to identify the exact origin of this nerve agent.
I'm sure that at Porton Down they will have reference samples of various types of, say, sarin, various types of VX and so on. And yes, it may lead to being able to point a finger in a certain direction.
The chemistry of the nerve agent may contain important clues, but investigators will also be considering whether the choice of such a rare and deadly poison is a message in itself.
Tom Clark reporting. Well, joining us now is Klaus Buchner, German member of the European Parliament, and Bill Browder, who has campaigned for Russian sanctions following the death of his own lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. Klaus Buchner, we're intrigued to know whether this is causing any interest at all in the European Parliament or indeed in Germany.
Well, definitely not enough. I think we need to react much stronger. The news were published in the papers, in the TV, but that's definitely not sufficient. We need to react now because Russia definitely tries to destabilize Europe. There are many attacks, that's not the only one. I'm thinking of the many cyber attacks also against the German government, against the German defense. So we need to have a strong combined reaction of all Europe to counter this. And it's very bad if Russia tries to divide Europe into different states. I'm mentioning Brexit. That's not what we need. We need now a strong common reaction.
Well, now, when you say a strong common reaction, give me a sense of what that might be.
Well, first of all, the sanctions do work to a certain extent, but we need to do more. We need to counter the cyber attacks. That means we need to have much more intelligence work to counter also the propaganda, the fake news. All this is really difficult, but it must be done. and it can be done only by a united Europe.
Right. Well, Bill Browder, we already have your sanctions, the Magnitsky sanctions, and still this is going on. So, I mean, although it's denied by the Russians.
Well, so first of all, the Magnitsky sanctions have not been implemented in one single case in the UK so far. And so if you want my opinion about what needs to be done to deal with this situation, is that after Litvinenko was killed with nuclear material from Russia, from the Russian secret police, there was effectively no reaction. We kicked out a couple diplomats, we put on the extradition list the 2 culprits, and then everyone forgot about it. And Vladimir Putin saw that and said, I guess we can do anything we want in England because nothing is going to happen. And so what needs to happen is that he and a lot of people around him have a lot of money, and they spend some of that money, a serious amount of that money, buying property in the UK. This is our big leverage here. And if we want to actually stop them from doing this again, if it's proven that Russia was behind this assassination plot, or assassination, if that's what it comes to be, then we should use the Magnitsky Act to seize their assets, to seize their properties of senior government officials and Kremlin-connected oligarchs in this country. And that would stop Putin from doing this again.
There was a jolly big if in the middle of your peroration there, and that if was if it's proved that it was Russia. And it may never be proved that it was Russia.
Well, it will be proved.
How?
It will be proved because these people are not as professional as you think. In the Litvinenko case, it took 3 tries before they actually got Litvinenko. They were leaving breadcrumbs of radioactive material all over the country. These people are not some type of super James Bond characters that didn't leave enough clues to figure out who did what here.
Well, Klaus Buchner, do you think there is, in fact, enough evidence already of other attacks and this one really to point the finger at Russia? You seem to have no doubt whatever this is, probably state orchestrated.
Well, you know that in 2006, Russia had a new law that allowed the agents to kill people outside Russia who are a danger to the country. And a short time after this law was installed, the first killing happened. So I think I can see a line. There are 14 or 15 people, I don't remember, who are now connected with such actions by a Russian secret service. It's not the first case and it's not the last case. We have to be very careful. Not in all of these cases it was proven that it was the Russian secret service, but in many it is.
Bill Browder, the Home Secretary, called it a reckless action. But everybody is still very reluctant, absolutely, to call it for the Russians.
Well, I mean, so what we know so far is that the man was considered to be a traitor. As our other guests said, the Russians passed a law allowing extraterritorial assassinations. This man was poisoned with a nerve agent, which is only possessed by government laboratories in rogue regimes like North Korea, Syria, and Russia. And I mean, basically, what we have is a prima facie case that Russia was behind this. Now, the difference between a prima facie case and a provable case in court, there's more evidence that's needed. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't operate very firmly on the assumption that Russia was behind this.
Bill Browder, thank you very much for coming in. Klaus Buchner, too, thank you very much for joining us.
We're back here now, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions, to say the least, over that spy attack in Salisbury. We know a nerve agent was used, but it is an unusual substance, to say the least, and it is now clear 21 people have been treated in all. So how exactly was it delivered? That's still a mystery, one of many. But what isn't is the risk taken by Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, who was first on the scene in Salisbury on Sunday afternoon. His bravery in going to the aid of the Skripals has been praised by, amongst others, the Prime Minister.
It is a sign of the severity of the potential hazard that fire crews were being equipped with these protective suits and masks today as they approached the bench where Sergei and Yulia Skripal were found. Their senior officers watching on as the crew re-secured a forensic tent over the scene. This afternoon, the officer who was hospitalised after first attending the incident was named as Sergeant Nick Bailey. He's now regained consciousness and is in a serious but stable condition.
He's well, he's sat up, he's not the Nick that I know, but of course he's receiving a high level of treatment.
The government has not confirmed precisely which nerve agent was used, but was trenchant in its condemnation of the culprits.
The use of a nerve agent on UK soil is a brazen and reckless act. This was attempted murder in the most cruel and public way. People are right to want to know who to hold to account.
Yulia and Sergei Skripal remain in a critical condition, pictured here in the Zizi restaurant, which they may also have visited on Sunday. The former Russian double agent was a familiar face in the pubs and cafes of Salisbury, but there's still no information about where he was poisoned. This photo of the immediate aftermath of the incident shows a police officer gathering evidence without protective clothing, clearly unaware of the potential hazard. At Sergei Skripal's house, several tents have now been put up and the cordon around it has been extended. It's not clear why the police activity at Sergei Skripal's house has increased so markedly today, but it's possible officers are looking to see if there are any traces of the nerve agent inside the property. There's no proof yet Russia was behind the attack, but today the Prime Minister told ITV News there would be consequences once the truth was out.
We will do what is appropriate, we will do what is right, if it is proved to be the case that this is state-sponsored.
Sergei Skripal's wife and son both died in recent years and are buried in Salisbury. A family consumed by repeated tragedy, with some now wondering if their deaths were more than just a terrible coincidence. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Salisbury.
When you stop to think about it, there are a great many more obvious ways to try and kill someone than using a nerve agent that has perhaps had to be transported halfway around the world. Knives, guns, explosives. I mean, the list is really endless, not to mention poisons that are a lot easier to get hold of. So it is hard to avoid the conclusion that whoever planned this attack was making something of a statement.
It's a fiendish way of dealing out death. A combination of chemicals designed to destroy the human body's vital components.
Nerve agents act by blocking the message from the nerves to the muscles. Critically, it's the muscles that control your breathing that are the problem. People can't inhale, and you get infusion of fluid into the lungs, and it's extremely difficult to breathe, and people usually die from asphyxiation.
Well-known nerve agents include sarin, which was invented by the Nazis and appeared most recently in the Syrian civil war, where the Assad regime stands accused of using it to kill civilians. VX was developed by British scientists in the 1950s. Its most famous recent victim, Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of North Korea's leader, assassinated in an airport last year. There is a newer generation of chemical weapon developed by the Soviet Union in the 1980s, the so-called Novichok nerve agents. Very little is known of them. The Home Office says the agent used in Salisbury was very rare and not VX or sarin.
We're probably talking about a tiny quantity here, sort of millilitres, which would be easily to be smuggled from a country like Russia into the United Kingdom. This looks like a professional operation. You need to know what you're doing to handle this stuff. If you don't, you're likely to die yourself.
In the century since poison gas killed tens of thousands in the First World War, chemical weapons were banned and their use almost unheard of. But they are once more bringing death and terrible suffering to the war zones of the Middle East and to the English Shires. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Well, our correspondent Carl Dinnan is in Moscow tonight. Any reaction? I mean, I guess you'd say our government's line was tough today, Carl. Was there some reaction from Moscow to that?
Well, believe it or not, the Russians say they agree with Amber Rudd, saying that once there is evidence, somebody should be held to account. But whereas I think the Home Secretary wanted to emphasise that somebody should be held to account, I think the Russians want to emphasise that that should happen when there is evidence. And they have also pointed out that in previous cases where Russians have died in Britain in apparently mysterious circumstances, that the British authorities have not shared what evidence there was with the Russians. And they say that is happening again in this case.
Well, Carl, as we've been discussing tonight, it's not exactly a subtle way of killing someone. And if it was the Russians, why this method, do you think?
No, you're absolutely right. There is, though, a long and inglorious history of former communist states assassinating their enemies using poison. Indeed, the Alexander Litvinenko inquiry said that Russian opponents of President Putin living abroad were at risk of assassination, including by poisoning. But as you say, this can be done in more subtle ways. It is believed even by more subtle poison than by using a nerve agent. This was clearly designed to send a message. On the face of it, the message is nobody betrays Russia and gets away with it. But there are still questions about that theory. Why did the Russians hold this man, then pardon him, then release him, only to then kill him, if it was them, 8 years later? We are still, I'm afraid, very much in the realm of speculation.
And we may be there for some time, but Carl, thank you very much indeed.
The police officer who rushed to the aid of the Russian man who spied for Britain is tonight recovering in hospital in Wiltshire. Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey is still in a serious condition after his own exposure to the nerve agent. Police have praised his courage and dedication. Last night, after several days' silence, Russian domestic news put the attempted assassination of the former spy on its evening bulletin, with what sounded like a couched, possibly satirical threat, warning anyone who dreamt of a career as a double agent to expect their life to be curtailed. The presenter went on to advise traitors or those who simply hate their country in their free time not to choose Britain as a place to live. But back to our own broadcast right now, and our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, who's been leading the way on much of this investigation and is with me again tonight. Mark, this search for the nerve agent, first of all, has that become any clearer this evening?
It has. I mean, the Home Secretary said earlier in the Commons, we now know more about the agent. But what I'm hearing is they've got things pretty specific now. It's taken them a few days to narrow it down to a nerve agent, and then now through the idea that it was an exotic and unknown type of thing through to something much more specific. And what I'm hearing is that this is being used to construct a case that there's very few labs in the world that could have produced something so esoteric and sophisticated in chemical terms.
When you say very few labs in the world, you mean this could not be a sort of criminal lab, it would have to be something stable.
Exactly. It points towards a state institution and, of course, a comparatively small number of states that have real expertise in chemical warfare.
And what are the implications of what you're hearing then?
Well, I mean, look, first and foremost, for Sergei and Yulia Skripal, the more precise an idea they have about how this agent operates, how it attacks the body, there may still be some hope of getting them back from the pretty catastrophic condition that we understand they were in after they were poisoned on Sunday. And of course, they remain officially in critical condition. We don't know whether it will be possible to bring them back to health. More broadly, it is going to form part of a diplomatic offensive, if you like. I think we can see this building up. Some fascinating comments today by the US Undersecretary of State to one of our colleagues, Christian Fraser. Let's have a look.
It was proven that there was a link to the Kremlin. Would the United States, as a close ally of the UK, be doing something about that?
I think we would be very supportive of whatever decision that the United Kingdom would decide to make.
Now, what I'm hearing is, to quote one person involved in this, a lot of conversations are now going on between the UK and its Western allies, obviously starting with America, but also European allies. This suggests to me that early next week we may see some kind of diplomatic push and the finger may be pointed at a particular country.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you.